I'm Amanda Gardner, and this is Time is on Your Side, Personal Time Management Strategies for Crunch and Beyond. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am the co-founder of the Deep End Games with my husband, Bill Gardner, who worked on the BioShock series. In 2017, we launched Perception on all major platforms. We made that game in our basement, which was pretty cool. And I'm also a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher. I have 4 kids, and I'm also a fantasy writer. So the reason why I'm here and speaking on this particular subject is I let poor time management and sort of poor self-care get the best of me, and I got extremely ill during the production of Perception. So I'm here to talk about ways that you can sort of make yourself feel better and basically get more time out of your day. So I'm going to start with something that seems a little off topic, peanut allergies. 3 out of my 4 children have nut allergies. I am the General Grievous of EpiPens. I have them everywhere at all times. And I've become a real expert on cross-contamination, keeping my kids safe when we go to restaurants and other houses. But I'm not an expert on restaurant best practices. I don't even know how peanut allergies began, and I'm not a medical professional. Now, how does that relate to crunch? Not crunchy peanut butter. It relates because I'm not here to debate about crunch. Crunch happens, and when it's gone, I'll stop talking about it. But for now, I want to be an advocate for people and to help anybody who's either going through crunch or about to go crunch, or just any game dev ever, because game development is about time management anyway. So this is for everybody. So it wasn't just crunch that made me sick. I had too much going on. I was working several jobs, at one point 4. I had a newborn. I had a toddler who was only a year older. I had a couple of elementary schoolers, and I got mono from all the stress. I mean, talk about just overload. It was really, really, really bad. Now, how did I get out? I say that I went to minivan university. I have to drive my kids all over creation in addition to working. So instead of listening to music or podcasts that sort of are fun but don't really have a thesis, I listened to over 100 personal development audiobooks in my car for free, mind you. So this is a little side note. Audiobooks don't have to be $25 a pop. All you have to do is get the Libby app, L-I-B-B-Y, link your library card to it, and there are hundreds of free audiobooks. It's the best. Anyway, I learned yoga. I got heavily meditated, lots of meditation. I completely revamped my diet and my nutrition in general, and I adopted a lot of the strategies that I learned from all of these personal development books. And those are the ones I'm going to talk about today. These are some of the highlights for me. So Deepak Chopra has this really great program he does with Oprah. Oprah and Chopra, power couple. They do Making Every Moment Matter. The Power of Full Engagement by Tony Schwartz and Jim Lair is really, really an interesting one. The Desire Map by Danielle Laporte is a completely new take on goal setting. Tony Robbins does the rapid planning method. And I'm going to be teaching one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. And lastly, The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. It really was one of the biggest game changers for me in my life. So Mrs. Gardner's advice. I spent my career before I was a game dev as a high school English teacher, and for over a decade. My students would come in burnt out. I taught honors kids. And they would come in on 3 hours of sleep because they're taking 5 honors and AP classes. They're in every single sport, and they're doing every extracurricular. And they were coming to me, and they were breaking down. And finally, I just said, all right, everybody, here's what we're doing. You guys are planning out your schedule and time management because you're all burning out. So I took this jar. I found this on the internet. I didn't tell them this. I found this jar, and I put a bunch of big rocks in it. And I said, is there any room in that? And they said, not really. And I said, this is your life, this jar, okay? And these big rocks are the things you can't move in your schedule. Everybody get out a blank paper, I said to them, and write down the things in your schedule that are indelible. You cannot change them. They wrote a bunch of things down. And then I got out a little jar of glass beads, and I poured it in. I said, see, there was more room. They were, oh, I see what you're doing. And I said, these glass beads are the things that are shoulds. You should do this. add that. And then they started to add some things to their schedule. I said, for example, instead of cramming one night before a test, why don't we break it up in a couple nights? And they're sitting there writing. I said, you guys, is it full? And they were like, yeah, it's full. Then I got sand, poured the sand on top. And I said, okay, these are like the optional things, okay? Maybe if you have a little room in your schedule, you can put it in. You have more time than you think, you guys. You're just spending it on not things that are terribly important. And then they were like, now it's full, Mrs. G. And I was like, no. And I took out a bottle of water and I poured it in. And I said, none of this will get done if you're not hydrated, so drink your water. So that was sort of my first foray into time management. But that's still how I plan a lot of my days. So we're going to get into the first real professional strategy, and that is the power of full engagement. So Tony Schwartz and James Laird did a really interesting thing. They went out and they studied professional athletes and took their strategies into the workplace. So you think of the way an athlete trains and the way an athlete works, and it's just not like work. They spend 80% of their time preparing for the 20% that they're executing. They are working out, stretching, eating right, sleeping right. Athletes do 80% prep for 20% engagement. That engagement is called peak flow. And Angela Duckworth talks about it in her book, Grit, which I highly recommend. Anyway, but, I mean, is that how game devs work? Like, what if we spend our 80% of our, like, what? We can't do that. You actually can. So what they found is if you sit down at the beginning of your workday and you spend time getting in the zone, getting ready to execute, you can put yourself in that peak flow state where you will get so much more done and you will get so much better quality. It's astounding. So I actually tried this. Does anybody know what NaNoWriMo is? So it's National Novel Writing Month. And essentially, in a month, you write an entire book. Now, I've got 4 kids, a job, teaching gigs, and whatnot. I wrote a giant fantasy novel in 30 days by using this method. What I did was, every morning I go to the gym. It's a non-negotiable for me. But what I did was, when I got on the treadmill, I put in a playlist for my book in my head. And as I worked out, I was planning what I was going to write. And then as soon as the workout was done, I grabbed my laptop. I bring my laptop to the gym. And I burned 3,000 words a day in an hour, okay? And I managed to write a big fat book. So if you plan enough, you can get in peak flow and get so much more done. It's actually really incredible. Another thing these 2 researchers found out is that, this is disappointing to me, willpower is a finite resource. I wish I could say that, like, you can do it, power through it. Scientists in 1998 did a groundbreaking experiment with hot chocolate chip cookies and math problems. And they pretty much found that by the end of all of these math problems wasted these people's self-restraint to the point where they had to have the cookies. And that's when they sort of cheated on the experiment, was when they just did too much of the math and they couldn't take it anymore. And that's why statistically most people cheat on their diets and their spouses after work. Make a little sense? So, the more mental space that's getting crowded in your brain is draining your actual willpower. And two people who are very famous who took advantage of this are Steve Jobs and Barack Obama, and they did it with their clothing. Steve Jobs had a uniform. He wore a black turtleneck and that was like what he wore, so that it was never on his plate. He never had to think about what he was wearing. Barack Obama, when he was in office, never picked out a single suit. Somebody did it for him, took it off his plate. So one of the strategies we're going to talk about is automating things in your life, getting them off your plate so it takes none of your headspace. And that's why they talk about the power of rituals in this book. So they say that 95% of what we do occurs automatically or as a response to anxiety. Okay? So if we can automate the good things in our life, it takes it out of our mental space. So willpower is a drain on you, but a ritual, something that you sort of craft and do time and again, takes 20 days to form a habit, 40 days to make it like a lifelong permanent habit. Those are things that you can do to take things off your plate. Brushing your teeth, for example, that's a pull. You hate the way it feels when you don't brush your teeth, right? But you don't think about it. It's not a question like, am I going to brush my teeth today? Your coworkers won't appreciate if you're asking yourself that question, by the way. So we're going to move on to the next strategy, which is habit 3. I'm not going to teach you all 7 habits of highly effective people. We're just going to talk about habit 3. So Stephen Covey pretty much wrote the primer on personal development when he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What habit 3 is about is being able to identify where a task falls in priority of importance, okay? So when you go into work, look at what you have to do. Mentally put it in a different category. Now, most people would say, especially in games, quadrant 1 is the most important, right? Because it's urgent and important. Covey disagrees. Covey thinks that the most important quadrant is quadrant 2. That is where you're getting prep for peak flow. We talked about that before. Quadrant 2 is planning. Quadrant 2 is relationship building. Quadrant 2 is getting ready to get ready to get ready, okay? Quadrant 1 is fighting fires. And listen, in game development, we are fighting fires all the time. You know, a game-breaking bug, something comes down the pipeline and ends up at you that you didn't plan on. However, if you spend enough time in quadrant 2 doing that nice prep, you will have the tools and sort of the attitude to fight those fires, fight them efficiently, move on, and not have to do as many of the quadrant 1 things. Let's talk for a moment about quadrant 3, which I call delegate. He calls it distraction. If something is urgent, that means it has to be done now. But if it's not important and it doesn't align with your goals, do you really need to do it? Outsource if you can. I say if you're looking at your list and you've got a lot of quadrant 3s, I'm going to say see who you can outsource them to, or just say no. No is a complete sentence. I don't necessarily mean that always in the job sense, but if somebody's coming to you and be like, hey, can you be on this, you know, PTO thing? Like, I'm sorry, you know, I just have to say no. I would say quadrant 3, delegate, or try to shift around a little. Quadrant 4, I'm just going to call it social media. Don't do it. Close your tabs, okay? I do take one thing here that I disagree with Covey. Pleasant activities. I think those are a 2. I think there are 2 because you need to feel rewarded and happy on a personal level. So let's put fun in quadrant 1. I think that's, I'm sorry, quadrant 2. I wanted to rhyme, it just didn't work. So the next one is Deepak Chopra. So I love Deepak Chopra. If you saw my GDC talk last year, he does this amazing, amazing, amazing talk. No, I did a talk on his amazing app called Ananda for meditation. And I know that this seems maybe a little bit more esoteric, but bear with me. Deepak says that time sickness is the epidemic of our generation. We always feel like time is running out and time is the enemy, more importantly. He said that most people deal with this in an external approach. Time acts on us and we must defeat it, right? Deepak offers an internal approach, which is a little bit different. He basically says, stop measuring your day by the clock altogether. Now, when you're in crunch, you might be scratching your head being like, interesting theory, no. But if you can change your belief that time is running short and live in the present moment, things change. And that is because time is psychologically colored. Let's take an hour, for example, an hour. An hour catching up with a friend, right? We've done a lot of that here in the green, right? It passes like this. Take that same hour, put yourself in a dentist chair and the anesthesia's not working. That is interminable, right? So an hour, time is kind of wibbly-wobbly, people. You know what I feel? Time is a flat circle. So I feel like you can sort of get into that peak flow. When you get into peak flow, time disappears. How many of you can agree with that? Like when you really get in the zone, wow, you don't know if 10 minutes or 5 hours have passed. That's the good stuff. That's the sweet spot. Time doesn't matter because you are getting after it. And I love getting into peak flow. Deepak also advocates for meditation to help you sort of expand your brain space. Last year I talked about how 80% of the time we're either in the past in our heads or in the future in our heads, and we're only in the present moment for 20% of our day. Meditation can help you widen that, okay? Let's move on. RPM by Tony Robbins. So I know a lot of you are familiar with Tony Robbins. It's like, isn't he that big, goofy guy? Watch on Netflix, I Am Not Your Guru, and you will love the man. He's incredible. But he's really a world-class time management speaker. And he has this RPM method, which stands for results-oriented, purpose-driven, I know it sounds so corporate, massive action plan. But it's amazing because traditional to-do lists are hot garbage. They are a race to the bottom, and there is no bottom, because when you get to like the end of that to-do list, and then you wake up the next morning, you got another one, and stuff always keeps getting bumped. And most of the stuff you do on your to-do list doesn't go toward your actual goals. It's just minutia, right? So with RPM, he basically has you focus on outcomes, okay? And I did a sample one for something I did on perception. So in perception, I really thought that nailing chapter 2 was critical from an emotional standpoint, okay? Why did I think that that was important? Because I wanted the players, they had to like Betty. They had to buy into Betty's story to really get the full impact. So I was thinking about my why. Simon Sinek does a great talk about why, and I think that everybody should look that up at some point. And then my massive action was I did a beat sheet. So if anybody is a writer and has never read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, do it now. It basically can outline any chapter, any full story arc. So I did out the beats, and then I went through and I thought about how the player would feel during that beat, and then I filled it in and actually wrote it. The last thing I did was I paid special mind to my wording because it was taking place in the 1940s and I wanted it to sound authentic. So that's a sample RPM, very goal-oriented. When I came out of it, I had a chapter 2 script that was engaging. Sample RPM for life, because this is life-work balance, is it not? Results. I want to feel fit, rested, and energetic. Why? Because I need to take as much off my plate as I can. People, if I am feeling tired, sore, or hangry, it's going to take me out of the zone. It's going to take me out of peak flow. I want to get as much off my plate as I can. And that's why it is critical for me to do meal prep. Take an hour on a Sunday, line up 5 mason jars, put in some chia seeds, oats, plant milk, and berries, put them in the fridge. You have breakfast every single day without having to blink an eye. You have to heat coffee. Dude, you just pull this out of the fridge and just sit there and start to wake up. It takes it off your plate. I mean, not like a literal plate. It takes it off your plate mentally. I always do yoga or meditate before work. I always keep my desk stocked with things that keep me in the zone, keep me happy. I use like peppermint oil and wild orange oil to sort of wakey. Lots of supplements. Just be ready. If you're prepared, if you take time to just have a work environment that's easy and natural and lets you get into the flow, that's critical. Next, Tony Robbins talks about chunking, which is basically saying that if we get overwhelmed by our lives, oh my God, I have so much to do, I have this. Tony Robbins says that if you can sort of mentally come up with a chest of drawers, and you know that everything in your life goes into one of those drawers, you feel a little bit better. Like, oh, okay, that's just something I gotta do for the kids. Put it away in that drawer. So this is just my set of drawers. Everybody has their own. But if you can sort of categorize the problems in your life, it makes things much easier. Not problems, but things to do. The Desire Map by Danielle Laporte. It's a whole book, but it's really just one question. How do you want to feel? That's it. How do you want to feel? So it's a revolutionary approach to goal setting, okay? Danielle Laporte, if somebody said, okay, my goal is to have 3 ship titles by 30, Danielle Laporte would ask you, okay, well, how would that make you feel if you had 3 ship titles by 30? Okay, would it make you feel prolific? Would it make you feel like a professional? Would it make you feel accomplished? Would it make you feel like an adult? Now reverse engineer some goals. Do you really need 3 ship titles by 30? It sort of makes it seem kind of arbitrary. So when you think about how you want to feel and then reverse engineer some goals from that, you can really free up a lot of time in your life. Like, wow, I don't need to do that to feel fulfilled. Isn't that funny? It can kind of change a lot for you. Moving on to The Slight Edge. This book changed everything for me. It's the fact that every life decision you make can make your life go up or down. There's a Japanese word for it, kaizen. It is the aggregation of marginal gains. We all know how exponential growth looks, right? We've all seen that curve. Essentially, everything you do matters. And that's kind of intimidating, right? But if you can sort of automate yourself to know that you're making a decision that's either going to go up or down, it makes a lot of sense. Let me show you the next slide that has a little bit of a chart. Okay, so for a long time, it stays stable. Imagine in your 20s, you might be making some poor food choices, you might be making some poor money choices. It kind of doesn't really affect you until, oh my God, you hit 40. I'm hitting 40 this year, and hopefully I'm going up, not down. But you know what I mean. It doesn't necessarily mean 40. But what it says here on this slide, and I'm not sure if you can see it, is what's uncomfortable early becomes comfortable later. Think about going to the gym every day. If that first week you're like, oh my God, why am I doing this? And then 2 months in, you're like, I can't imagine not doing this. Same goes for the bottom that says what's comfortable early becomes uncomfortable later. Like, yeah, that's fine, midnight snacks, no worry. And all of a sudden, you just don't feel good anymore. So I love this idea. Slight changes equal big eventual payoff. The payoff does not happen in a week. I've seen a meme out there that's like, I started a diet today. How many pounds did I lose? That kind of thing. This is a long game, okay? And these are the kind of choices that Jeff Olson suggests you think about on a daily basis. These are the kind of things that if you intuitively know that you're making a good choice or an uptick, you're good. You kind of also know when you're making a downtick choice. Okay? And like I said, it's the long game. So if you make a few down ticks, no worry. But it's a trend, and it's eventually going to have a giant payoff. I actually, for my payoff, I don't have caffeine anymore. I have 4 kids, several jobs, and I don't need caffeine. I've changed so much about my health, nutrition, awareness, and sleep that my body is like a battery itself. I don't need that artificial caffeine because I've made so many choices. But it took a long time. You know, it took about 2 years. And now I'm like, woo, I'm good. But anyway, the last piece of advice has to do with my juicer. Kind of a weird thing, but that's a beautiful Williams-Sonoma citrus juicer. I use tons and tons and tons of lemons. So I'll give you a little background. I used to watch the show called Good Eats on Food Network with Alton Brown, so good. He used to say, never buy a unitasker for your kitchen, and that's something that only does one thing, like a garlic press. You will never need to do anything with that except for press garlic. But I adopted that sort of for my entire lifestyle. I was like, I'm gonna multitask everything. I'm the mom who can do it all. And no, you shouldn't multitask because it's been proven time and again that the results of what you produce when you're multitasking are so much worse than if you just sat down and did it right. You spend more time correcting yourself after multitasking than you would have if you just sat down and did it out with nothing else. And so the juicer comes into play here because like I just didn't want to buy a unitasker. I was squeezing my own lemons. And then finally, I just loved the design of this. It was so pretty. I'm like, I'm just gonna do it. I bought it. I squeezed my lemon. I was like, oh my God, 10 times the juice came out. That was so worth it. And it's kind of a metaphor for time management. Like, if you really get it down, you'll get 10 times the juice, right? It's such a good thing. Next one is growth as a human need. One of the things that Tony Robbins talks about is that from a personal level, if we're not growing, it makes us unhappy as humans. So if you can sort of make sure that your schedule builds in time for you to be passionate, and if your job's not doing it, just carve out like a half-hour a day to read up or to take up a hobby, because if we don't feel like we're growing, we're dying. Act as if is a common thing. Is if you feel like you're in crunch and you're not handling things, if you start to act like you're handling things, it's been shown that you actually start to be able to do it. So I know I don't have enough time to do an entire session on that, but I feel like my next talk is going to be about act as if. It's actually really fascinating. Lastly, close your tabs at work and in life. I really feel like too often we are so scattered. We're on our phones. We're walking across the street on our phones and talking to people. If you take more time to do what you really want and to feel better and to do what you're at work to do, then things are going to be a lot easier for you. So I'm right at about 5 minutes left, which is great. So let me just give you my contact information. So Amanda@thedeependgames.com. If you have any ideas of what's worked for you, I would love to hear it. If you implement any of these ideas or read any of these books, I would love, love, love to hear that. Or if you need a crunch coach, hit me up. I'm your girl. I'm also on Twitter at Amanda S. Gardner. And yeah, I can take questions. I've got 5 minutes. See, I managed the time. Hey. questions or things that have worked for you. I'm happy to hear from some of you. So anybody have anything to say? Yes? Shout it, and I will reiterate.
If you had to pick one area of life to manage better first, which one would it be? Just as advice to someone who's maybe trying to get a handle on things.
I would say put yourself above everything except for your immediate family. When I got sick, I put my health, oh, I'm so sorry. He said, what do you put first if you have to prioritize? And I say your own health. Because if you, like I said, it takes everything off your plate if you're not achy, tired, and hungry and have a million things physically going on. I used to have chronic anxiety disorder. I don't have any anxiety anymore because I've planned everything. I've done a lot of meditation, and I've read a lot. I've gone to therapy. Like, if you have to, it's like when the airbag in the plane comes down, you put it on before you put it on anybody else. Okay? And I know that that's a cheesy metaphor, but if you're not well, you're not taking care of your job, you're not taking care of your family, you're not taking care of anything. You have to put yourself first, and I'm super adamant about that. Yes?
Hi. So a lot of the strategies you talked about were for the individual, but in games especially, we work in team environments.
Yes.
What are different ways that you've been able to implement these kind of strategies as a team, and what platforms have you used to begin that discussion with your team?
I love that idea. So she asked about how do you implement this with your team. So my situation is I make games in my basement with my husband, which is very different and also, ooh, it's getting loud, and also slightly contentious. So I have actually sort of changed his diet and as well, and I've changed a lot of the things for our household. But we use contractors in our studio because we're super indie. But I think that I cut a lot of the fat. I keep things really tight, and not in a terse way, but in a very, this is what's happening kind of way. We don't have like a water cooler at work. I mean, we have when we go off to soccer in the minivan kind of thing. I try to keep everything as succinct as I can, and I do like to share my strategies with my husband, and if my contractor, the contractors ever want some of this stuff, I'm happy to give it. But we have a remote office situation, so I wish I had more to say about that, so sorry. Yes?
I guess my question is, how do you really start sticking to the habits that will help you in this sort of thing when you
Yes.
come home and you're tired and really all you want to do is just pass out in bed?
Okay, I'm so glad she asked that. She said, how do you actually stick to these habits? Commit to 20 days. 20 days, write that down. 20 days will be a habit for anything. So if you can sort of put it in your calendar, make yourself do these things just for 20 days, because anybody can do anything for 20 days. By then, it will become automated and integrated in your day. And you mentioned the end of your day. I don't know if you're a night owl or like a lark. They call them larks when you love to wake up early. Maybe wake up a little bit earlier. Maybe start to do stuff at the beginning of the day. I don't know. I mean, everybody knows their own body, but I also have to say, listen to your body, because if it's telling you to go to sleep, there's a reason. And I'm huge into that whole take what you need. If it's sleep, if it's medication, if it's meditation, take whatever your body needs and your mind needs. So if you go home at night and you need to crash, that's good. That's you listening to your body. So other than that, 20 days, try something different if you want. Any other questions? We have time for one more. Yes?
How much do you sleep?
8 hours. I make that a non-negotiable. I mean, like if I have a kid wake up in the middle of the night, But yeah, no, I absolutely make certain that I do that because I cannot. My husband, he doesn't need nearly as much sleep as I do, but that's his body. This is mine. So yeah, great question. One more, because we have 1 minute. Anybody? See, time management. Everything's time management. No? Okay. Yes.
So in regards to growth, we were talking about growth, growing a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Something I use it with carving up time. I found that's for me, 2D art. I don't have much time to really practice, and a lot of whenever I get into a drawing, I get stuck, and I'm like, I want to keep optimizing it. I found that by setting aside 10 minutes a day, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes and sketch for 10 minutes. As soon as the timer's up, I stop the drawing and I don't touch it.
I love that. So if you couldn't hear him, he said that he will set a timer to draw for 10 minutes. I think that doing that is perfect. As a writer, I love to do like flash fiction, if anybody's ever done that. It just keeps you sharp, you know? Just take that 10 minutes, draw, sketch, write, make a little music, do what you gotta do, but find that time if it's your passion, absolutely. And we are out of time. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was awesome. Thank you.